I still remember the way the rain sounded that night, like someone tapping their fingers along the roof, slow and deliberate. The storm had followed me deep into the forest, swallowing the last traces of the main road. My headlights caught only trees, slick and glistening like wet bones. When the engine coughed and died, the silence that followed was heavier than thunder. That's when I saw the cabin. A faint outline through the mist, its windows flickering with a sickly, pale light. I told myself it was shelter, that I could wait out the storm inside, maybe find a fire to warm my hands. But the closer I got, the quieter the forest became. Even the rain seemed to hesitate. The doorknob was cold, colder than metal should be, and when I turned it, the air inside was already breathing. I never should have gone inside. The forest had fallen silent. A thin fog pressed against the ground, curling around the roots like fingers. The cabin waited, pale and still, half hidden behind a stand of skeletal pines. I stepped onto the porch. The wood groaned beneath me, soft, hesitant, like it had been holding its breath for years. Inside, the air smelled faintly of smoke and something sweeter, like damp earth after rain. The door was loose. It swung open with a sigh, letting in the cold. I paused, hand on the frame, listening. Nothing moved, yet the floorboard seemed to answer each of my steps. The furniture was old. A chair slumped in a corner, its cushions sunken and dusty. A table bore scratches and dark stains, and in the center, a candle, half burned, its wax curled like a pale finger, still standing. The kettle had boiled. The water had cooled into a thin mist that clung to the spout. I could almost see the hand that had poured it, lingering too long, leaving warmth in the metal. The air tasted of iron and tea, sharp and unnatural. I moved slowly. Every step felt heavier, each breath louder than the last. A floorboard shivered beneath me. Then another. The house seemed to lean closer, listening. Lightning struck outside. A sudden white slit through the window. I flinched, and then I saw it. Not behind me, not even in the room. In the mirror, a figure, tall, shadowed, impossibly still. Its face, I couldn't tell. But the reflection wasn't me. It moved slightly, a hesitation in its posture, and the mirror held it, silent, waiting. I tried to turn away. My body refused. The air had thickened, clinging to my skin, damp and cold. I could hear soft footsteps. No, only the hum of my own heartbeat, dragging itself through the quiet. The candle flickered. A sigh of wind or something else brushed past the curtains. The figure leaned closer in the glass, stretching into corners I couldn't see. Its presence felt patient, as if it had been waiting for me to arrive. I wanted to speak. My mouth formed words, but they dissolved into shadows. Even the kettle's metal seemed to tremble under the weight of that stillness. I could smell smoke again, faint and curling, and something else, the faint copper tang of fear. The reflection blinked. I froze, matching its motion in panic. But its eyes stayed on me, deeper, colder than any window or shadow. I could feel the temperature shift, a static crawling along my spine. I stepped back. Each movement echoed through the cabin like a whisper of my own doubt. The floorboards moaned. The chair creaked. I wanted to leave, but the door was farther than it had been. And outside, the fog had thickened, hiding the path I had taken. Lightning flickered again, and for a moment the figure vanished. The mirror held only my own pale, trembling reflection, but the room remained charged, a quiet pressure, waiting. I didn't move for long. I listened to the hum, the soft shift of wood, the air settling around me. Time felt thin, stretched, like it could snap at any second. And in that stillness, I realized the cabin wasn't abandoned. It had been waiting. For me, the cabin had settled into silence. The fog pressed against the windows, thick and cold. Every surface held a layer of dust, dry and fragile under my fingers. I moved through the room, slow, careful. The kettle had cooled completely. The wax candle curved into its own shadow. And then a hum, a radio, tucked in a corner, crackled to life. Static hissed and trembled. Then a voice, warped, broken, whispered my name. Soft at first, almost gentle. Then louder, repeating. My name. I froze. The air grew heavy. thick with the smell of old wires and rain pressing against the glass. I reached to unplug it. The cord was severed. Clean, almost deliberate. The radio continued. The voice grew clearer, sharper. Don't look outside. The words wrapped around me. Slow, deliberate. I wanted to step back. My skin prickled, hair rising. The room suddenly too small. The fog outside shifted, curling against the window. Lightning tore across the sky. A flash of white, brief, blinding. And there a silhouette, still, watching, beyond the glass. I couldn't blink, couldn't move. The figure had no features, only the dark outline of someone standing, waiting. The radio murmured behind me, a low, insistent hum, my name again and again. I stepped closer. The fog pressed against my palms through the cold glass. The figure didn't move, but the edges of its shadow seemed to flicker with the lightning. Each strike revealed it, then swallowed it again. The room smelled of damp wood and iron. My breath came shallow, brushing my ears in soft, rapid whispers. I wanted to cover my face, but I couldn't stop listening. The radio pulsed, a heartbeat of static, warning, calling. I thought maybe I could turn it off, but it wasn't mine to control. No buttons, no switch, no cord. Only the voice, only the warning. Another flash of lightning. The figure shifted slightly, almost closer, and for a heartbeat, I felt the fog inside the cabin, wrapping around me, cold and heavy. The radio's voice became urgent. Don't look outside. I obeyed, my eyes pressed the floor, staring at shadows and dust motes dancing in the pale light. The hum wrapped around my ears, vibrating through the wooden floor. Time slowed. I could feel the silhouette beyond the window, patient, silent, watching through the veil of fog. The radio finally stilled, but the cabin remained charged, trembling just under the skin. I didn't breathe for a moment, afraid that sound would betray me. Lightning flashed again, soft and distant this time. The figure gone, or maybe just hidden. The room smelled faintly of ozone and wet leaves. The fog outside moved like water over stone, and I realized I wasn't alone. Not really. The warning lingered in the air, pressing, subtle, soft, cold, impossible to ignore. I sat on the floor, hands pressed to my knees. The radio remained dead, cordless, silent, but in the quiet, I could still feel it, waiting. And I understood the fog had eyes. I didn't look at the window again. I didn't move. I listened and waited. The fog clung to the trees, thick and damp. Every branch dripped, a slow, hollow rhythm into the puddles at my feet. The air smelled of wet pine and cold earth. I saw it then. A faint lantern, glowing pale orange, suspended between the trunks. It swayed slightly, though there was no wind. I stepped forward. The ground squelched beneath my boots. Leaves stuck to my fingers, dripping into shallow pools that mirrored the lantern's glow. It moved, just beyond reach, always ahead, always pulling me deeper. The mist wrapped around me, pressing against my skin, brushing cold across my neck. I followed, drawn by something I didn't understand. Branches scratched my arms. Water seeped into my shoes. The light floated, distant, never steady, never close enough to touch. My heartbeat thudded against my ribs, loud and uneven. The forest seemed endless. Rustling shifted through the trees, but no one appeared. The lantern glowed again, a soft, beckoning pulse. I followed, step by careful step, feeling the fog settle around me like wet cloth. Minutes or hours passed. I lost track. The ground curved beneath me, shadows twisting into shapes I didn't recognize. The light lingered, always just ahead, drawing me in a slow circle. I realized then I was moving in loops. Every path led back to the same place. The cabin door stood before me, familiar, silent, waiting. The lantern hovered, pale and patient. It didn't flicker or fade, just led me, always back. I could feel the forest bending, reshaping itself around me. The air felt thicker, heavier, like it knew my thoughts. I stopped, breath rising in small, uneven clouds. The fog pressed close, a damp hand against my face. Silence settled like a weight, broken only by dripping water and my own quiet, trembling footsteps. The light pulsed again. It lingered near the doorway, then floated back into the trees. I thought of leaving, of running, but the forest seemed to stretch endlessly. Every step forward returned me here. I crouched by the door, listening. The cabin smelled of smoke and damp wood. The hum of the night wrapped around me, and the lantern glimmered faintly in the distance. I realized I wasn't just lost. I was being guided by something patient, by something that knew the paths before I even walked them. The fog shifted. Branches bent. Leaves whispered. Water rippled at my feet. The lantern pulsed again. I didn't follow this time. I didn't move. It hovered, waiting, and I understood, finally, the weight of being alone. The forest stretched on. The cabin breathed beneath my hands, and the lantern lingered, suspended between the trees. I stayed by the door, silent, listening to the wet earth and rustling leaves. The light pulsed once more, and I waited, knowing it would always lead me back to the same place. The cabin smelled of damp wood and rain-soaked earth. The fog pressed against the windows, thick, almost soft enough to touch. Outside, the wind had calmed, leaving a brittle, wet silence. I stepped carefully across the floor. Each movement echoed, soft and hollow. But beneath the ordinary creaks, there was something else. Whispers, almost words, shifting, curling under boards. They rose and fell like breaths in a quiet room. I knelt, fingers brushing the rough wood. The whispers sharpened, clearer, broken, gasping, fragments of voices tangled in the silence. A sigh, a pause, a word that almost made sense. "You're standing," the voice trembled, stuttered. "On us." I froze. The phrase repeated in broken rhythm. Almost a chant, almost a warning. The air felt heavier, pressing against my chest. I could smell the damp earth beneath the floor, earthy and bitter, mixed with cold wood. My knees pressed into the planks. The whispering followed my movements, rising with each breath I drew. I tried to pull my hand away, but the floor felt alive, resonating beneath my touch. The voices pressed closer, intimate, knowing. The cabin itself seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the fog shifted in faint, restless waves. Inside, shadows pulled beneath the corners of the walls. The light from the candle flickered, elongating shapes that seemed to crouch in the edges of my vision. I whispered, almost to myself, but the words didn't echo in the empty room. They were absorbed, returned, distorted beneath the boards. Soft footsteps, or was the floor itself moving, breathing under me? I pressed my ear closer. Broken breaths. Shivers ran along my spine, cold and steady. The voices, fractured and trembling, seemed to circle me, weaving on the floorboards like roots. "You're standing on us." The phrase repeated, slower now, deliberate, patient. I could feel it, sinking beneath my skin, settling in the marrow of my bones. I rose, slowly, hands grazing the walls for balance. The whispers didn't stop. They followed me, subtle vibrations under the soles of my feet, a soft insistence. The air smelled faintly metallic, like wet iron, mixed with the damp decay of old wood. I couldn't move. I wanted to leave, but the cabin seemed wider and yet narrower at the same time. The floorboards whispered with every step, echoing my hesitation, my fear. The candle trembled in the pale light, and shadows stretched to meet me. I sat again, listening. The voices soft and distant, like breath from beneath a door, yet the words lingered. "You're standing on us." I breathed quietly, letting the phrase settle, letting the silence around it grow. The cabin held me, patient, watching. Outside, the fog moved slowly, a living presence, but inside, the floor beneath me whispered secrets I couldn't touch. I stayed still, hands pressed to my knees, listening to the rhythm of my own pulse mingling with the soft, broken breaths beneath the boards. The room was empty yet full, the whispers persistent, and I realized, finally, the cabin wasn't silent. It never had been. The cabin smelled faintly of rain and old wood. The fog outside pressed against the windows, pale and constant. Everything felt suspended, held in a quiet, dripping pause. I noticed the clock on the wall. ornate, carved with curling patterns that seemed alive in the candlelight. The hands were frozen at 3:12. I watched. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The candle flickered. Shadows stretched and shrank. The clock did not move. I stepped closer. The wood beneath my fingers was smooth, cool, almost alive. I traced the rim of the clock, careful. The air smelled faintly of metal and dust, sharp and sweet. Thunder rolled in the distance. I touched the glass. The cabin changed. The walls looked newer. Furniture gleamed softly, untouched by years. Photographs smiled from the frames, faces bright and alive. It was familiar, yet not. A home that had never aged, and yet had always existed. Lightning struck. The flash filled the room with a white, almost violent clarity. Everything shifted back. The walls sagged, the furniture dulled, the photographs faded. Everything had aged, collapsed into the weight of time, except the clock. It remained at 3:12, frozen, patient. I could feel the hum of stillness emanating from it, thick as fog, pressing against my chest. Time seemed optional. I reached out again, hesitant. The surface was cold, almost slick, holding the faint smell of ozone from the storm outside. My reflection shimmered faintly in the glass. The hands did not move. I sat on the floor. The cabin breathed around me, the wood creaking under its own weight. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, scattering rain and fog. The room felt heavy with memories that weren't mine, yet I could touch them, smell them, feel their weight. Thunder rolled again, and for a heartbeat, the younger cabin flickered back into place. I blinked, then it was gone. Dust and shadows settled over everything, but the clock stayed, silent, unmoving, indifferent. I pressed my fingers to the wall, tracing the edges of the molding, the carved pattern of the clock. The air tasted faintly metallic. The hum of stillness pressed against my ears, a vibration that went through the floor and into my bones. I tried to look away, but the clock held me, not with eyes, but with the weight of uncounted hours, frozen and patient. It was a reminder of something outside time, or perhaps beneath it. The cabin settled once more. Shadows pooled beneath the corners. The fog pressed against the glass. And I stayed, knowing the clock would remain 3:12, always, while the world around it shifted, faded, and returned. The rain had begun again, steady, soft, endless. It drummed against the porch, wet and cold. But the rhythm felt wrong. I leaned closer to the edge, fingertips brushing the damp wood. The drops layered over each other, hundreds, thousands murmuring, whispers hidden inside the rain. Stay inside. The words twisted to the patter, slow, deliberate, repeated. I froze, listening. The air smelled of wet pine, rain-soaked earth, and something faintly metallic. I stepped back. The porch seemed empty, the fog curling just beyond the tree lean. Then I noticed it. Footprints, wet dark, tracking across the cabin floor. From the door, heading in, I held my breath. The whispers in the rain continued, overlapping, layering, insistent. Each step I took seemed to echo too loudly, swallowed by the hum of the storm. I bent to inspect the floor. The wood glistened where the footprints pressed. The air smelled sharper here, damp, iron-tinged, alive with warning. I could almost hear something shifting beneath the surface. The rain grew heavier. Every drop seemed like a finger tracing the edges of the cabin, pressing, patient. The whispers blended with it, forming a rhythm, a chant. Stay inside, stay inside. I wanted to run, but my feet were slow, reluctant, glued to the floorboards. The footprints stretched further, moving closer. No one was visible, yet the wet trail betrayed a presence, patient, deliberate. I pressed my hand against the wall for balance. Cold, solid, unmoving. The air smelled damp, electric, charged with something beyond the storm. I could feel the pulse of the rain in my chest, in my fingertips, in my throat. Another set of footprints appeared, closer now, crossing the room silently. Each one carried the weight of someone or something breathing through the floor. I stepped back carefully. The rain whispered, layering over itself, urgent, imploring. The cabin shivered, small creaks and groans moving under my weight. The footprints seemed to respond, stopping when I stopped, advancing when I moved. I sank to the floor, hands pressed against my knees, head bowed. The rain outside became a pulse, a chant, a breath. Stay inside, stay inside. The room smelled damp, wood-heavy, filled with the tension of unseen eyes. The footprints no longer moved, yet the threat lingered, patient. Every creak, every drop against the roof felt alive, waiting, watching. I didn't look up. I didn't move. I let the whispering rain fill the room, fill my mind, until my breath slowed. The cabin held me, and the storm outside murmured warnings I could not escape. And in that quiet, suffocating stillness, I understood the rain was not outside. It had always been inside, too. I stayed on the floor, listening, waiting for what would come. Footprints frozen, whispers continuing, and the storm relentless, patient, eternal. The storm had settled into a low hum. Rain pressed against the windows in soft, uneven rhythms. The cabin smelled of wet wood and something colder, faint and lingering. Lightning flashed, and there she was, a pale woman in the glass, closer than before, her face unreadable, still, silent. I blinked. The next flash brought her nearer. I could see the edges of her hair, the faint curve of her shoulders. Her expression never changed. Watching, waiting, I moved to the mirror, covered it with a cloth, heavy and rough in my hands. The outline didn't disappear. It bled through, faintly glowing, the shape of her pressed against the fabric. The room smelled of damp cotton, mixed with the cold iron tang of the storm outside. I could hear the hum of the rain, layering with something else, a soft, slow breathing. Steady, close, behind the curtain. I froze. The air pressed against my skin, cold and heavy. The candle trembled, light flickering, shadows stretching to meet her. Every breath felt like an echo in the quiet room. Lightning struck again. Her reflection moved closer, though I hadn't shifted. I could see her eyes in the faint glow of the cloth, pale and unblinking. Her outline hovered there, patient, relentless. I pressed my hands to my face, hiding. The outline remained, faint but present. I could feel it, breathing warmth against the cold cotton. The storm outside had slowed, but the tension inside the cabin thickened. The power flickered, and then went out. Darkness filled the room, heavy and complete. Her breathing became louder, closer, right behind the curtain. I wanted to run. My feet refused. The shadows clung, stretching, bending, waiting. The air smelled faintly of ozone and wet wood, mixing with the metallic tang of fear. I crouched on the floor, hands pressed to my knees, heart hammering softly, almost inaudibly in the silence. The outline glowed faintly through the cloth. The breathing continued, patient, deliberate, behind the curtain. Lightning flickered again. Her reflection shifted closer still, pressed against the glass even with the cloth in place. I could see the outline of her face, pale and calm. The room smelled faintly of storm and shadow, of wet walls and time pressing inward. I stayed there, listening, breathing in the damp air, smelling the rain, the wood, the faint metallic tang of the unknown. The cloth shielded me, but only just. Her presence lingered, patient and unmoving. I didn't move. I didn't look beyond the cloth. I pressed my hands harder to my knees, letting the cold and the fear anchor me. Her reflection, her presence, pressed against the edges of the room. And I understood. She was patient, still, waiting for something I could not see. The storm hummed, the rain whispered, and I stayed, silent, hands pressed to my knees, listening to the breath of the pale woman behind the curtain. The hallway stretched ahead, narrow and dim. Shadows pooled beneath the edges of the walls. The air smelled faintly of damp wood and old varnish, pressing in with each slow step. At the far end, the door. It didn't budge. The handle turned, clicking and resisting, stubborn, cold under my fingers. No matter how I pushed or pulled, it stayed locked. The storm outside rumbled low, shaking the cabin. Thunder rolled, distant, and then closer, sharper. And in that moment, the door creaked, a whisper of movement, and it swung ajar on its own. I stepped closer. The air smelled warmer here, tinged with dust and something sweet, faintly metallic, A child's room lay before me, frozen in time. Small furniture, polished with dull by decades. Toys arranged as if waiting for someone to return. A bed neatly made, covers tucked tight, a thin layer of dust over the pillow. The smell of old fabric, faded and soft, filled my nose. And then the music, a box delicate, carved with tiny flowers. It started on its own. Soft notes floated through the room, trembling, fragile, nostalgic. I could feel it vibrating through the floor, beneath my feet. I stepped closer, hands brushing the cold edge of the bed. The dust shifted under my fingers, clouds of memory in the pale light. The music box turned slowly, relentless, patient. Every note carried a faint ache, a sorrow I couldn't place. The storm hummed through the cabin, wind pressing against the windows, rain dripping in gentle pulses. Shadows flickered across the walls, stretching and curling toward me. I could feel the weight of absence in the room, a presence not quite there, waiting in the folds of silence. I knelt beside the music box, fingers hovering above the delicate wood, afraid to touch. The melody continued, soft and unwavering. It smelled faintly of polished wood, wax, and something floral, almost like a memory of spring. The bed creaked under my knees. The air pressed against my skin, damp, heavy, and strangely comforting. I imagined the child who had once played here, small hands turning the box, eyes bright, laughter echoing somewhere in the corners of the room. And yet, the air carried something else, a quiet, lingering sorrow. I stood, hands brushing the edges of the furniture. The music box's tune wrapped around me, haunting, gentle, patient. The window fogged slightly, breath pressing against the glass. The storm rattled softly, distant, persistent. I didn't move to leave. The room held me in its stillness, in its soft, aching memory. The door remained slightly open behind me, shadows spilling into the hallway, and the music continued, turning in circles, echoing across the years. I took a slow breath, smelling dust, wood, rain, and something unplaceable, ancient. I felt the pulse of the cabin, the patient heartbeat beneath the floorboards. The music played on. I stayed there, watching the dust float in the pale light, listening to the storm and the fragile notes. And for a long while I understood this room had waited, and it would keep waiting. The cabin smelled faintly of smoke and damp wood. The fog outside pressed against the windows, curling around the porch like fingers. Inside, the air was still heavy waiting. On the mantel, a photograph caught my eye, a family, smiling in front of the cabin. Sunlight glinted off the glass, dust motes drifting in the pale light. One face had been scratched out, jagged lines, cruel, deliberate. The rest of the family smiled, frozen in time, unaware. I reached for the frame. The glass was cool, sticky with dust. I could feel the edges of the scratches under my fingertips, sharp, faintly metallic. The air smelled of old paper and varnish, mixed with something unplaceable. I stepped back. The fog outside swirled, pressing against the cabin like a living thing. A shiver ran along my spine. The silence was heavy, waiting. I leaned closer again, and then I saw it, my own reflection, faint, shimmering, forming where the face had been erased. Not solid, not complete, but unmistakably me. The edges blurred, merging with the scratches. I could feel my pulse in my throat, sharp, insistent. I withdrew my hand. The photograph seemed to hum, the faint pressure of presence pressing through the glass. I could hear the soft rustle of my own breath in the still air. The room smelled faintly metallic, like blood or iron, faint beneath the wood and dust. I stepped closer again, drawn despite myself. The reflection pulsed with the flicker of pale light. It was patient, waiting, forming slowly, deliberately, and then it shifted slightly as though aware of my gaze. I tried to look away, but the reflection clung to me. Every shadow in the room seemed to lean toward me. The air pressed against my skin, cool and damp, heavy with unspoken weight. I pressed my fingers to the wood of the mantel, cold, solid, anchoring me. The photograph's glass vibrated faintly under my touch, as if breathing. The fog outside whispered against the windows, a soft, layered hum. I blinked. The reflection wavered, edges blurred, then sharper, The face where the scratches had been, my face, stared back at me, silent, patient. I sank to the floor, hands pressed to my knees. The air smelled of rain, dust, and faint iron. The cabin seemed to hold its breath, listening to mine. I didn't move. I didn't speak. The reflection remained, faint but insistent, pressing against the scratches. The photograph waited, patient, unyielding. I realized then it had always been waiting, waiting for me to see it, waiting for me to recognize it. The fog pressed harder against the windows. Shadows pooled beneath the corners of the walls. The silence stretched, thick, unbroken. I stayed on the floor, watching the photograph, watching the faint shape of my own reflection, and listening to the cabin breathe around me. And in that stillness, I understood some faces are never forgotten. The cabin smelled of wet wood and smoke, faint and lingering. The fog outside pressed against the windows, soft and thick. Inside, the air felt warmer, yet heavy, carrying the weight of waiting. A small candle burned on the table. Its flame flickered gently, pale and steady. Even as wind gusted through the cracks of the cabin, it refused to die. I leaned closer. I tried to blow it out. A puff of air, a quick breath, and it reignited immediately, unharmed, stubborn against the currents. I watched it, mesmerized. The wax seemed wrong. There was no wax left, only the flame, hovering in the air, patient, floating. The hum of the cabin pressed softly against my ears. I reached toward it, fingers trembling, brushing the table. The air smelled faintly of smoke and iron, metallic, alive. The flame danced, twisting into shapes. A face appeared, faint, delicate, formed from the smoke curling around the flame. Eyes hollow, expression unreadable. It whispered something soft, fleeting, brushing my ears with a voice that wasn't there. I froze. The flame pulsed, flickering in rhythm with my heartbeat. The smoke carried faint whispers, rising, circling, curling toward me. I could smell the faint sweetness of burnt candle, mixed with wet wood and cold air. I stepped back, hands pressed to my chest. The face remained, hovering, patient, watching. The flame twisted, curling into new forms, almost alive. I could feel its warm, soft, insistent, pressing against the cold of the cabin. I tried to look away, but the flame drew me in, pulling attention with subtle insistence. It moved with a rhythm, like breathing, like a pulse that was mine. I could hear the soft hum in the air, in the wood, in the smoke itself. The flame whispered again, soft syllables, almost words, brushing against my mind. It smelled faintly of something familiar, like memory folded in smoke. The edges of the cabin glowed pale in its light, shadows stretching toward the corners. I pressed my hands to the table, steadying myself. The flame twisted higher, forming and reforming. The face in the smoke grew slightly sharper, the eyes more defined, watching, patient. The candle burned without wax, without end. I sank to the floor, hands pressed to my knees, heart quieting, breath slow. The cabin seemed to fold around the flame, leaning in, patient. The smoke curled, whispering, carrying the faint warmth of breath and presence. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I watched. The face, the flame, the endless, hovering glow. It whispered, faintly, a presence folded into the smoke. And I understood, some things do not burn. Some things do not die. And some faces speak only through light, smoke, and waiting. I stayed there, kneeling, watching the flame, listening to the soft whispers of the candle that wouldn't die. The cabin smelled of damp wood and old plaster. Outside, the wind hummed to the fog, brushing the windows with cold breath. Inside, the air was heavy, still, thick with dust and shadow. Above me, the second floor should have been gone, collapsed long ago. But I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate pacing. I froze. The dust shifted in small clouds, tracing lines along the floor. It moved in patterns, following the rhythm of steps above. Slow, measured, patient. I whispered, almost afraid to hear my own voice. "Who's there?" The footsteps paused mid-sound. Silence. Then the ceiling answered with a slow, dragging noise. A groan of weight, stretched and deliberate, pressing down through the timber and plaster. I pressed my hands to the floor. Cool, dusty, solid beneath my fingers. The air smelled faintly of mold and wood smoke, tinged with something older, metallic. Each breath felt heavy, filled with dust and echoing footsteps. I watched the patterns in the dust. They curved, traced back, and then returned, repeating in a rhythm I couldn't escape. The cabin seemed to breathe along with it, small creaks and groans syncing with the sound above. I could feel it in my chest and my spine, the subtle vibration of weight pressing down. I stepped closer to the center of the room. The footsteps continued, deliberate, circling, hovering above. I could almost hear the soft brush of unseen shoes against the rotted floorboards. Every creak of the ceiling sounded like a reply, dragging, patient, impossible. I whispered again, softer this time, trying not to disturb whatever moved above. The air seemed to thicken around my words, pressing cold and damp against my skin. The smell of dust and old timber grew stronger, layered with something sharp, metallic. The footsteps paused again mid-step, and then the ceiling groaned, slow, dragging, heavy. I sank to the floor, hands pressed to my knees, dust clinging to my skin. I listened to the rhythm above me, patient, intentional, relentless. The cabin seemed smaller here, walls closing in, shadows stretching. Every breath echoed too loudly, swallowed by the hum of stillness. The footsteps resumed, circling, pacing, marking the room above as if the collapse had never happened. I pressed my face to my hands. The smell of wood, dust, and something older pressed into my senses. The ceiling groaned again, dragging, deliberate, a reply I could not see. My heartbeat slowed, not from calm, but from the acceptance of what I could not stop, could not change. I didn't rise. I didn't move. I stayed on the floor, listening to the soft, deliberate rhythm of steps in a space that should not exist, feeling the cabin breathe, sigh, and settle around me. And in that quiet, heavy with dust and shadow, I understood. Some presences do not leave. Some floors remember what was and continue, patient, eternal, above the room that no longer stands. The cabin smelled of wet wood and smoke, heavy and lingering. Outside, the night was calm, soft fog curling around the trees. Thunder rumbled low, rolling across the sky, but inside it was louder. The storm pressed against the walls with a weight I could feel in my chest. Every clap of thunder seemed to echo endlessly, sharper, closer, alive. Wind howled from the fireplace, cold gusts curling through the hearth, carrying the scent of smoke and damp ash. I leaned closer, fingertips brushing the edge of the mantel. The wind whispered something faint, soft, unintelligible. I glanced outside. The forest was still, branches motionless, leaves untouched. No rain, no wind, only silence beyond the glass. And yet, inside, raindrops began to fall. Soft, cold, landing on the floorboards, on my shoulders, on my outstretched hands. The scent of wet earth rose, filling the cabin with something alive, something impossible. I stepped back. The air felt heavier, saturated with the storm. Static prickled along my skin, hair standing on end. Each breath carried the smell of damp wood, iron, and something older, something pressing against me. I reached toward the fireplace. The wind pressed against my face, warm and wet, carrying the rhythm of the storm inside. I could hear the drops pattering, layering over the thunder, creating a strange harmony. The room shifted subtly. Shadows stretched unnaturally, bending toward the source of storm. The floor beneath me was damp, cold, alive with quiet, impossible movement. I could feel the pulse of it in the floorboards and the walls, in the air around me. I whispered, barely audible, "Is it real?" The rain did not answer. It continued, patient, deliberate, falling from no sky I could see. I pressed my palms against my face. The air smelled of storm, of wet wood, of something metallic and ancient. Every drop that hit my skin felt like a pulse, a heartbeat I could not escape. The thunder rolled again, pressing against the ceiling, the walls, the very bones of the cabin. I stepped toward the center of the room. Rain fell harder here, pooling at my feet. The fireplace hissed, wind curling, carrying whispers I could not understand. Shadows shifted, bending with the movement of the storm. I sank to the floor, hands pressed to my knees, heart slowing, breath trembling softly. The rain tapped against my shoulders and the boards beneath me. The wind hummed to the empty hearth, and the storm existed only inside. I didn't move. I didn't speak. The outside remained calm, silent, indifferent. The inside raged, patient, impossible, eternal. And in that stillness, I understood. Some storms do not pass. Some storms wait inside, folded into the walls, the floor, the very air you breathe. I stayed there, kneeling, feeling the storm press against me, listening to the impossible rain, and breathing the heavy, patient hum of the cabin that had learned to hold it. The cabin smelled of damp wood and old varnish. Fog pressed against the windows, soft and cold. Shadows pulled in the corners, still, patient. In the corner of the room, a chair, rocking, motionless, facing the bare wall. Its would gleam faintly in the pale light, edges worn smooth. I looked away. When I glanced back, it had shifted slightly. Not much, just a fraction, subtle, deliberate. The air smelled faintly of wax and old timber, pressing close. I stepped closer, fingers brushing the polished arm, cool and hard. The chair creaked softly under the weight of the air around it. Shadows stretched along the floor, pooling toward the walls, curling along the legs of the chair. I looked away again. When I turned back, it had shifted once more. Closer? No, just different. Almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. I sat, the wood pressed cold against my thighs, damp from some unseen moisture. The chair rocked slightly, slow, steady, almost breathing. The cabin smelled of damp wood, dust, and something older, sharper, lingering beneath the floorboards. A whisper rose from the seat, soft, low, tentative. Don't turn around. I froze. The air pressed against my skin, heavy and humid. Shadows danced along the walls in the pale flicker of light. The chair rocked again gently, as though breathing with the room. I tried to focus on the wall. Plain, bare, nothing there. Yet the chair felt alive. The wood shifted under me, patient, waiting. The whisper came again, closer, in my ear, though no one moved. Don't turn around. A faint brush of air, warm, curling along my neck. The room smelled faintly of old smoke and wax, layered with something metallic, like cold iron. I pressed my hands to the armrests, grounding myself. The chair rocked, almost imperceptibly, a rhythm I could feel through my legs and spine. The walls remained bare. The fog pressed softly against the windows, still silent. I didn't move my head. I didn't breathe loudly. I stayed in the chair, listening, feeling the air press. The wood shift, the whisper linger. The cabin exhaled around me, slow, patient, eternal. Shadows pooled, edges blurred. The chair remained, facing the wall, waiting, and I understood some presences do not ask for attention. They do not move to be seen. They wait, patient, silent, knowing. I stayed in the chair, hands pressed to the armrests, rocking slowly with the room. And the whisper circled around me, soft, persistent, patient. Don't turn around. The cabin smelled of cold wood and smoke, faint and lingering. Fog pressed against the windows, soft and pale. The candlelight flickered, shadows shifting, reaching into corners I didn't want to see. A voice called my name, soft, familiar, trembling. It was my own, or something shaped like it. I froze. The air felt thick, heavy, vibrating against my skin. The smell of damp would mix with the faint sweetness of burning wax. The voice whispered again. Questions I had never said aloud. Questions I had not even thought. They brushed against my ears, pressing into my mind. I pressed my hands to the table. The surface was cold, sticky with dust. The candle trembled. The shadows danced closer. I dared to look at the mirror. My reflection stared back, but it moved differently, answering before I could. A tilt of the head, a glance that followed me, patient, deliberate. I stepped closer, the air damp and metallic against my skin. The hum of the cabin pressed into my chest, syncing with the rhythm of my heartbeat. I whispered into the candlelight. The mirror answered. Soft lips, words formed without sound, gestures I did not make. The voice circled me, cold and warm at the same time, pressing from behind and around. The candle flame twisted, smoke curling into faint shapes, echoing the questions I had never spoken. Every breath I took tasted faintly of wet wood and iron. I backed toward the wall. The shadows stretched, trembling alive. The air carried a low hum, almost a whisper beneath the whisper. It felt like the cabin itself was listening. I touched the mirror. Smooth, cold, unyielding. The reflection moved, patient, deliberate, mirroring neither me nor my thoughts. It whispered, soft, hollow, questions folded into the smoke of the candle. I sank to the floor. Dust clung to my hands, my clothes. The air pressed down, damp and heavy. The voice circled, patient, quiet, folded into the wood, the shadows, the smoke. I did not answer. I did not move. I only listened. The cabin breathed around me. The candle trembled, and the hollow voice continued, waiting, patient, eternal. Some voices do not seek response. Some questions do not require answers. Some reflections move first, before you even think. I stayed there, kneeling, hands pressed to my knees, listening to the soft, hollow cadence of my own voice that was not entirely mine. And in the silence that followed, I understood the quiet horror of being answered before speaking. The cabin smelled of old paper and dust, soft and clinging. Fog pressed against the windows, pale and still. The wind hummed faintly, threading through the cracks in the walls. On a low shelf, I found a photograph album, leather-bound, edges frayed, smelling faintly of smoke and damp. I opened it. The pages held faces, past guests of the cabin, frozen in pale smiles. Each photograph pressed cold against my fingertips. I could feel the hum of the cabin, quiet, patient, watching. At first, it was ordinary. People in chairs, leaning on tables, walking in hallways. Then I noticed him, a man, standing always just behind someone else. His expression calm, unchanging, the same in every photograph, never aging. I flipped the pages slowly, each turn creaking softly. The smell of old wood and paper pressed against my nose. His presence grew heavier with each page, a shadow in the corners of faces that weren't his. Yet he was always there, silent, waiting. The last few pages made me stop. The photograph shifted subtly, the light catching reflections in the glass. And then I saw it, the last photograph, taken today. And there I was, sitting in the cabin, and behind me, the same man, watching, patient, eternal. My fingers trembled against the paper. The room felt colder, shadows pooling along the edges of the walls. The fog pressed against the windows with soft, wet breaths. I could feel in my chest a weight I could not move, a presence I could not deny. I closed the album slowly. The air smelled faintly of paper and something older, metallic, like distant rain. The wind hummed through the cabin, soft, insistent. The floorboards groaned beneath my feet. I backed away, feeling the hum of the photograph, the press of eyes that were not mine. The man, he had been here always, patient, waiting, watching. I tried to tell myself it was impossible, a trick of the shadows, the light, the fog pressing in, but the air pressed heavy, damp against my skin. And I knew some presences do not age, some watchers do not blink, some moments are already recorded before you even arrive. I left the album on the shelf. Dust clung to my hands, and the cabin exhaled around me. The wind whispered faintly through the cracks, and I felt him, patient, behind me, always just behind me, even as I walked away. The cabin smelled of wet wood and cold air. Outside, the fog pressed thick against the windows. Shadows pooled quietly along the corners, patient. It was 3:12. The first knock came soft, almost polite. Tap, tap. The second followed, the same, soft, measured. The third shook the walls, a thrum that vibrated through the floor into my chest. The cabin seemed to shiver with it. I held my breath. The air was damp, smelled faintly of iron and smoke. The wind hummed outside, low and restless. I stepped toward the door. The wood pressed cold against my palm. The handle was slick with something faintly damp, a muddy imprint pressed in a human shape. I froze. The fog pressed against the windows, closer now, as if listening. The shadows along the walls stretched, curling like smoke around the corners. I turned the handle slowly. The door creaked, inch by inch. No one was there. The porch was empty, pale and wet. The handprints lingered, dark and accusatory. I closed the door. My fingers trembled, cold against the wood. The cabin exhaled around me, dust stirring in quiet swirls. The fog whispered against the windows, insistent. I sat, listening to the empty hallway. The knock returned again at 3:12. First soft, second soft, third like the walls would split. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I could feel the cabin breathe, patient, eternal. The handle pressed against my hand again, cold, wet. Each night repeats itself. The same knock, the same silence outside, the same mud lingering, as if waiting for me to see. I understood then, some doors are never meant to open. Some knocks do not end. Some presences do not leave. And each night, as the cabin hums and the shadows press, I feel the cold regret of even touching the handle. The knock comes patient, relentless, and I am here, alone, listening. The air outside smelled damp and cold. Mist curled along the forest floor, soft and clinging. The trees stood tall, still, their branches unmoving. I took a step. Soft mud pressed under my shoes. Then footsteps. Not mine. I stopped. The forest fell silent. Even the mist seemed to hold its breath. I moved again. The steps returned, careful, deliberate, following. Every leaf that rustled under my foot was mirrored by some other presence. I slowed my pace. The air pressed against my skin, cool and heavy. A hum vibrated through the trunks, low, patient. Every breath I took felt loud, echoing. I tried to listen. The footsteps paused when I paused. They began when I began. It was impossible to know where they came from. Impossible to know if they were following or leading. Shadows pooled beneath the trunks, dark and waiting. The mist curled around my ankles, damp, cold. I felt the weight of unseen eyes pressing from behind and ahead at the same time. I turned slowly. Nothing, only the forest, still and silent. Yet the sound persisted, soft footsteps echoing mine. I walked faster. Leaves and branches scraped my arms, wet and sharp. The footsteps matched each step. I tried to run. They ran too, always in sync, just beyond my sight. A branch snapped. I froze. The forest froze. The mist hung heavy, trembling. I whispered to myself, hoping the sound would break the pattern. It didn't. The footsteps, soft and deliberate, answered me anyway. The fog thickened. Breath hung in the air like smoke. Every sense heightened, stretched thin. I was alone, yet never alone. The forest was listening. I stopped again. The footsteps stopped. The hum of the mist pressed against my ears. I could feel it in my chest, heavy, patient. And then I understood, some forests do not sleep. Some footsteps are endless. Some presences move with you, always just out of reach, mirroring every sound, every breath, every heartbeat. I turned slowly back toward the cabin. The mist clung, the trees watched, and the soft, echoing footsteps followed, always following, always listening. The cabin smelled of damp wood and lingering smoke. Outside, fog pressed against the windows, thick and gray. Inside, the walls seemed quieter than before. I walked down the hallway. The floorboards whispered under my feet. Then I saw it, a door where no door had been, just a wall yesterday. Now a door, pale and cold. I pressed my palm to it. The wood felt alive, pulsing softly beneath my fingers. A faint hum vibrated through the floor. I leaned closer. Blackness stretched beyond the frame. Nothing but shadows and the soft drip, drip, drip of water somewhere deep inside. I took another step. A whisper touched my ear. A name I hadn't heard in decades. Not my name exactly, but a childhood name, one I never spoke aloud. I froze. The air was thick, heavy, smelling faintly of wet stone. The whisper grew. Other names followed. Names I had forgotten. Names that belonged only to the smallest parts of me. The fog outside pressed closer, like it wanted me to see, to hear. My breath came slow and shallow. The dripping echoed in the walls, slow, patient, eternal. I reached for the handle. Cold metal burned against my palm. The whispers grew louder, mingling with my own heartbeat. Each name tugged at a memory I could barely grasp. I stepped closer. The blackness beyond the door seemed to inhale, drawing me in. The air smelled wet, earthy, like soil after a storm. A shiver ran down my spine. I listened. Each drip matched the rhythm of my pulse. The names whispered again, soft, trembling. The door waited. I wanted to turn away, but curiosity pressed in warm and insistent. The blackness seemed to breathe in time with me. I pressed my ear to the wood. The whispers became questions. Questions I had never spoken. Answers I didn't know I was seeking. The door hummed softly under my hand. The fog curled outside, slow and patient. I could feel the weight of something watching, waiting, beyond the edge of what I could see. I stepped back. The hallway exhaled, dust rising in soft spirals. The blackness remained. The whispers lingered, faint and insistent, calling me by names that once belonged to me, names I could never truly leave behind. And I understood. Some doors are never meant to open. Some doors appear only to ask questions you cannot answer. I turned away, but the blackness pressed at the edges of my vision. The whispers settled into silence, and the fog outside leaned closer still. The door was there, always there, waiting. Andy was left alone with the echo of my own forgotten voices. The cellar smelled of damp earth and rust. Each step I took stirred the shadows, curling along the stone walls. The air was thick, heavy, tasting faintly of metal and wet, with a single bulb hung from the ceiling, swinging slightly. Its pale light barely reached the corners. And there in the far corner, something waited, a mirror, coated in decades of dust, that I reached out, letting my fingertips trace the rough glass. It shivered under my touch, cold through my skin. I wiped at it. A breath of old air stirred the dust motes, floating like tiny ghosts in the dim light. And then I saw. The cabin reflected back, but I was not in it. Every familiar detail sat there in quiet perfection, the furniture arranged just so, the kettle, half-boiled, still steaming, the rocking chair facing the wall. Even the candle flickered in place. And yet, I was absent, a ghostly omission that made the air press against my chest. I stepped closer. The floorboards groaned under the weight of my curiosity. The smell of rust sharpened, biting at the back of my throat. The hum of the bulb above seemed louder. I moved my hand again across the glass. Each swipe cleared more, and the cabin beyond grew more alive. But still, I was not there. I was nothing more than a shadow outside the frame, a thought not meant to exist. I whispered my own name. It came back to me, faint and hollow. No echo, no warmth, only the quiet certainty that I had been erased from this reflected world. The silence pressed in. I could hear my own breath, ragged and shallow, and the faint, steady drip of water somewhere unseen. The mirror did not blink. It did not shift. It waited. I touched the cold glass again. It trembled under my fingertips, but the cabin remained unchanged. Everything familiar, everything silent, everything mine except me. I tried to move around it, to see from another angle. Nothing shifted. No hint of me appeared. No reflection joined the room. Only the cellar behind me, damp and rusted in the quiet, unblinking mirror. I stepped back. The bulb swayed, casting the mirror in angles of pale, uncertain light. The shadows along the walls stretched and trembled, as if holding their breath with me. I wanted to leave, but curiosity held me, and a strange, cold wonder pressed against my chest. Was the cabin always like this? Was I ever truly part of it, or only a visitor to something older, something patient? I breathed slowly. The dust settled. The mirror reflected the cabin perfectly, but I knew now it was not mine. I had been forgotten. And yet, I could not look away. The air smelled sharper now, colder, metallic. The shadows lingered, and the silence pressed closer. I stepped back again, and the reflection remained. Still, perfect, alone. The cabin was quiet, except for the candle flickering against the walls. Its pale light made the corners soft and wavering. I could hear the hum of the wind outside, but inside, the air felt different. The walls seemed to move, not with drafts, not with wind. They pulsed, slowly, steadily, like they were breathing. I reached out, my fingers brushing the warm wood. It was alive beneath my touch. A slow, rhythmic thrum vibrated through my palm, and I realized it had a heartbeat. I pressed closer. The pulse deepened, echoing softly through the floor. The smell of aged timber mixed with something damp, like earth after storm. The candlelight danced along the walls. Each pulse made shadows sway like slow waves, stretching and shrinking, as if the cabin itself was inhaling and exhaling around me. I stepped back, but the walls still moved. I could feel it through the soles of my shoes, through the faint pressure of air brushing my skin. I whispered, almost to myself, and my voice came back, muffled and tender, as if the room were listening. The heartbeat slowed for a moment, then resumed. I walked along the wall, hand grazing its surface. Every inch pulsed beneath me, warm and soft, like a living thing contained in wood and stone. The candle flickered again. The air smelled faintly of smoke and sap. The floorboard beneath me shifted slightly, breathing in time with the walls. I sank to the floor, leaning my head against the timber. The pulse was steady, comforting, terrifying. I didn't move. The room seemed to sigh with me, a gentle exhale that carried a strange calm. The heartbeat and the hum of the cabin became one. I felt my own chest slow, sinking with its rhythm. I could hear the wind outside, distant and hollow, but inside there was only warmth and the slow, living thrum beneath my hands. The cabin was alive, and somehow I was part of it. I closed my eyes. The shadows played across the walls in waves of pale light. The heartbeat continued, slow, steady, patient, and for a moment I accepted it. The room breathed, the room lived, and I was here, silent, still, aligned with its quiet, organic rhythm. The candlelight softened, the walls rose and fell around me, and the hum in the air became a lullaby. I lay still, letting the pulse of the cabin fill the empty spaces of the room, until I drifted into a silence that was alive, and I was a part of it. The cabin shivered with each flash of lightning. Outside, the trees were still, yet the forest shifted beneath the electric glow. Shadows stretched like fingers across the wet ground. Snow drifted in one moment, silent and pale. The next, fire flickered through branches, crackling without sound. Rain poured, then spring green unfurled, dew glistening in the brief light. It was impossible. The storm wasn't weather. It moved like memory, folding decades over themselves. And it remembered me. I pressed my face to the window, breath fogging the glass. Each lightning strike revealed something different. A child running. A cabin half buried in snow. Faces I didn't recognize, and one I knew. The wind howled through the cracks in the walls. It carried smells of wet earth, burnt pine, and cold frost. I could feel the pulse of the cabin beneath my feet, steady and human. Or not human. I stepped back. The floorboards creaked softly. I wasn't alone. The storm whispered in drifts of rain and shivering leaves, and I knew it spoke of the past, and of me. Lightning struck again. The forest shifted. A fire consumed a patch of trees, then vanished, replaced by new blossoms. I could see the same cabin in each scene, older, younger, abandoned, lived in, and always, I was there. I touched the window. The glass was cold, slick with condensation. My reflection wavered, merging with the flickering storm outside. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The storm pressed closer, folding decades into seconds. I smelled smoke, frost, wet leaves, and rain-soaked earth all at once. A memory of my own, not entirely my own, tangled with it. Each lightning strike pulled me forward. I saw the past and future, overlapping, colliding. The cabin changed, its walls younger, older, untouched, lived in. And through it all, the storm remembered me. I felt it watching. I could hear in the rustle of branches, the hollow groan of wind through the pines, the soft hum of the earth beneath. It remembered everything, every breath I'd taken here, every step, every pause, every quiet thought. I knelt by the floor, hand brushing the old boards. The pulse of the cabin and the pulse of the storm intertwined. I felt my chest slow, matching its rhythm, surrendering to something bigger than the air, bigger than the walls. Lightning etched the forest into sharp relief. Snow, fire, rain, spring, and back again. The storm folded in on itself, and I folded with it. The rain whispered my name, carried in every gust. Leaves shivered in patterns I couldn't follow. A sense of time collapsed into a single, trembling now. I lay back, letting the pulse, the flash, the memory fill the cabin. There was no fear, only recognition. The storm remembered me, and I remembered it. The candlelight wavered against the walls. Shadows breathed in rhythm with the pulse of the storm outside. I closed my eyes. The lightning faded. The forest paused. And for the first time, I felt the quiet surrender of being known fully, endlessly, by the storm that remembered. The fire crackled in the hearth, pale light flickering across the walls. Shadows danced like quiet secrets, stretching and shrinking with each breath of flame. The cabin smelled of smoke and old wood, comforting yet tense. I thought I was alone, but something moved just beyond the edge of the glow. A figure. It sat perfectly still by the fire, knees drawn, hands resting quietly on them. Its face faint, serene, almost smiling. The kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes, yet seemed to know me. I froze. The wood under my feet hummed softly, responding to the heat. The air felt heavier, dense, as if the cabin itself were holding its breath. I whispered, "Who are you?" The figure didn't shift. It leaned slightly closer, though not in motion, and answered, "You let me in." The words drifted across the room, carried in the hum of the fire. Warmth touched my hands, though the figure remained just a shadow of light. I tried to step closer. The floor seemed to stretch beneath me, distant yet familiar. I noticed a smell, faint musk, like old soil mixed with smoke. It wrapped around me, pulling me nearer without moving a finger. Every flicker of flame painted the figure in shifting tones. Pale, soft light, then almost transparent. I could feel its gaze on my neck, my shoulders, my chest. A quiet recognition. Something I had known but couldn't place. I wanted to speak again, to ask it to leave, but my mouth wouldn't move. The words caught like frost in my throat. The fire's hum rose, blending with the creak of the cabin and the whisper of the wind outside. Time stretched. Seconds bled into minutes. The figure's smile never faded, and it waited. I tried to shift my eyes away, to glance at the walls, the ceiling, the old photographs, but the figure moved with me, or perhaps the room did. Every shadow became sharper, then soft, echoing its presence in the quiet rhythm of the cabin. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, slower, heavier, matching the unspoken pulse of the room. The air pressed closer. Every breath I took seemed shared, as if inhaling drew the stranger in further, and exhaling gave a part of me away. The fire flared suddenly, bright and sharp. The figure's outline glowed briefly in the heat, then sank back into the soft shadow. Its smile lingered, etched into the folds of darkness. I wanted to run. I wanted to escape. But my feet were rooted, the warmth of the hearth anchoring me, and the figure waited. "You let me in," the words repeated, quieter this time. They carried a certainty I couldn't resist, a reminder I didn't want to face. I had crossed the threshold. I had let it sit. I had let it know me. The cabin held its breath with me. Smoke curled upward, twisting and folding around the stranger's outline. The soft smell of burning wood and damp earth mingled in the warm room. I could feel the heat on my skin and the chill of understanding in my chest. And then the figure was still, not moving, not blinking, just sitting, silent now but present, watching me watch it. I sank to the floor, fingertips brushing the warm wood. The fire crackled softly. Shadows leaned closer. Breath became the only sound I could trust. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I only listened. The stranger waited. And I knew, in the hollow of that quiet, I had given it a home. The attic door had always been sealed. Thick wood, swollen with years of cold and damp. Yet tonight, faint light seeped through the cracks, flickering like a pulse. A pale orange shimmer that moved as if it breathed. I touched the door. Cold paint under my fingers, peeling. The air smelled faintly of dust and aged paper, heavy with neglect. A quiet hum rose from the boards beneath my feet. I pushed. The hinges groaned, soft at first, then louder, protesting the intrusion. Light spilled into the stairwell. The floorboards quivered under each cautious step. The room inside was empty. Nothing but shadows stretching across the angled ceiling, and the single candle burning in the center. Its flame quivered, casting the walls in a warm, trembling glow. On the floor, a journal lay open. The cover was worn, leather soft from touch. I knelt. My hand trembled as I reached for it. The words inside were written in my handwriting. The smell of wax and old paper mingled with the attic's must. The candlelight danced across the pages, highlighting phrases I didn't remember writing, thoughts I had never spoken, fears I had never voiced, yet here they were, inked in familiar curves of my hand. I swallowed. The warmth of the flame met the chill of the room, and I felt the emptiness of the space pressing against my chest. A soft whisper of movement, though the air was still, rustled the edges of the pages. I tried to step back. The light caught my reflection in a small pane of glass near the roof. It wasn't quite me, the shadow of someone who had been here before, or someone I would become. I ran my fingers over the candle's edge. No wax burned down. It held the flame without consuming itself, a quiet, impossible thing, as if the room itself fed it. I leaned over the journal again. The letters seemed to shift beneath my gaze, shaping themselves into warnings I could feel more than read. Each word a pulse in my chest, echoing with the soft beat of the attic above. A breeze, or the memory of one, brushed my neck. The candle flickered violently. For a second, I thought I saw movement in the corners, shadows stretching toward me, hesitant, patient, waiting. I wanted to close the journal, to leave the room, the attic, the cabin behind. But my hands wouldn't let go. The writing seemed to anchor me, to tether me to this place that wasn't just old wood and dust, but something alive, watching, remembering. The candle's flame rose higher, shadows dancing faster across the beams. I could hear the faintest heartbeat, not from my chest, but from the floorboards themselves. The attic was breathing. I whispered barely into the flickering air, "Who wrote this?" The room did not answer. Only the candle swayed, and the flame leaned toward me, warm, inviting, accusing. The attic seemed smaller now. I could feel the walls pressing not cruelly, but insistently, as if reminding me that I belonged here, or that it belonged to me. I closed the journal slowly. The candle's flame dipped, yet remained. Light filled the corners with the soft insistence of inevitability, and I understood. The attic held its secrets. It waited, and I had found my own reflection in its quiet glow, a self I had never fully known, and perhaps would never leave behind. I stepped back. The door creaked softly as I closed it, the faint light flickering through the edges like a heartbeat I could feel, but not see. The smell of wax and paper lingered, warm and heavy, in the quiet attic air. I didn't move. I only breathed, and the light waited. Morning came, pale and quiet. The storm had left, leaving the world washed in a soft, hollow light. I moved to the cabin slowly, each floorboard groaning under my weight. The smell of wet wood lingered in the corners, sharp and cold. I reached for the door. The handle was cool, smooth, familiar. I turned it, expecting sunlight or forest beyond. But the door opened onto the same hallway I had just left. I stepped back. The floor beneath me felt thinner, the air heavier, like it held its breath. Another door. Same story. Each doorway led only back inside. I tried a window. Morning fog reflected in the glass, soft and white. But beyond, I saw only another window, one I had passed a moment ago, staring back at me with the same pale light. The walls seemed to pulse with my heartbeat. Rustling air, the faint hum of the cabin itself, filling every corner. The smell of dust and cold plaster pressed into my nose. I touched the wood. It was solid, yet strangely alive. I walked in circles. Every door, every window, every path returned me to the same place. The cabin had changed while I slept, rearranged, closing any chance of escape. Even the floors creaked differently now, as if alive. I paused, breath shallow, the silence thick, dense, almost tangible. I tried shouting, but the walls swallowed my voice. Only my own echo returned, a mocking rhythm. The morning light fell across the room, differently each time I looked. Shadows shifted in impossible ways, stretching and curling around corners that shouldn't exist. The air smelled faintly of smoke, though no fire had burned. The floors felt uneven, tilting subtly, as if leading me nowhere. I tried every door again, slower this time. The handles chilled my fingers to bone. I pressed my face to windows. Each reflected another window, empty, pale, repeating into infinity. I pressed harder. Nothing changed. The cabin felt patient. It was watching, waiting. I could almost hear a soft whisper of laughter under the floorboards. Or maybe it was my own voice, dissolving into the empty rooms. Time stretched. Minutes, hours, or days, I could not tell. Each step I took returned me to the center of the cabin. The corner seemed farther away, yet closer at the same time. I was caught in the rhythm of the house itself. The pulse of walls, the hum beneath the floors, the rustling, the silence, the soft, insistent air. I leaned against the door. It was cool, solid, yet it pressed back against me like skin. I could feel the grain of the wood beneath my fingers. And beneath that, a warmth, faint, steady, unyielding. I closed my eyes. Breathe in, breathe out. I could feel the cabin's heartbeat, matching my own, then slowing, then expanding beyond it, as if it remembered every footstep I had ever taken. I opened my eyes. The doors and windows stared back, infinite, silent, waiting. I wanted to scream, but the silence held me, and I realized there would be no leaving. The cabin was not empty. It was patient. It was alive, and I was already inside. I sat on the floor, fingers tracing the worn boards, breath trembling, warm against the cold air. The pale light shifted softly, a quiet pulse, and I understood, finally, that I was trapped in something older than me, older than the storm, older than memory. The cabin breathed. I listened. I waited. The candle flickered, pale and steady. Its light stretched across the walls, soft and golden. Outside, the forest was quiet, still like it had been waiting. Inside, the air felt warmer, heavier, familiar in a way I couldn't name. I looked into the mirror. My reflection wavered. Faint, almost gone. The face I had known yesterday seemed thinner, slower, quieter. I raised a hand. The glass held it, but not fully. A shadow of myself remained, fading, dissolving into the pale light. I spoke. My voice filled the room, echoed, lingering longer than it should. Even after I stopped, it hung in the corners. Whispers of my own words curled around the beams, soft as the breath of the cabin itself. The floors creaked beneath me, but not like before. They hummed, alive, patient, as if remembering each step I had ever taken. I pressed my hand to the wood. Warmth pulsed back, slow, rhythmic. The heartbeat of the cabin, or mine, I could no longer tell. I moved through the rooms. Each doorway seemed smaller, then larger, then exactly right. The walls leaned toward me, welcoming, yet silent. The windows reflected not the forest, but fragments of my memory, small glimpses of yesterday, of the candle I had lit, the steps I had traced. The air smelled of old wood and smoke, but there was no fire. I breathed it in, felt it settle in my lungs. Even the dust seemed alive, rustling softly against my fingertips. I reached the cellar. The mirror stood in its corner, waiting. I wiped the glass. Nothing reflected back. Not the cabin, not myself, just shadow, and a sense that I had always been here. I sat on the floor. The candle burned endlessly beside me, its flame neither growing nor shrinking. Time had lost meaning. I tried to rise, but the floor held me gently, like a parent hand. I whispered my name. It echoed through the rooms. Not loud, not scary, just there. And I realized the cabin remembered me, and I had become part of it. A quiet pulse in the wood, a breath in the air, a presence woven into the silence. The walls seemed to lean closer. I could feel their patience, their attention, the soft hum of old beams vibrating through the floor, through my fingers, through me. I closed my eyes, and I heard rain, gentle, steady on the roof, but when I opened them, the sky was clear. No storm, no clouds, just the soft, unbroken light of the cabin. I understood then. I was both here and not here. A shadow in the mirror, a whisper in the air, a pulse in the walls. I breathed with the cabin. It breathed with me. Time stretched, folded, held me close. No doors, no windows, no escape. Only the soft warmth that was beneath my hand. The endless candle beside me and the quiet, watchful light. I let myself sink into the rhythm. The echo of my steps, my voice, my breath, all folded into the cabin, becoming one with its heartbeat, its hum, its patient attention. Sometimes I still hear rain on the roof, but I know it's not raining anymore. And that is enough.